Hello, everybody, and welcome back into the Orbit Football Podcast, doing another episode here today. It's just me and Blake. Tyler, we had very busy schedules this week. Didn't exactly work out the best with recording. I will say though, Tyler's he's in the midst of preparing for travel, so he'll be traveling here over the next couple of weeks. But we are going to be we got a couple really good shows coming up with the Orbit Football Podcast, especially with everything that's been happening in college football over the past handful of days. We were going to do an episode earlier in the week. We couldn't be able to do it, obviously getting our immediate reactions to the college football playoff situation, but there's really not much else that needs to be said of what everybody else has said. We're obviously going to go over that today in this episode of the podcast. It'll be obviously a little bit of a shorthand recap of Conference Championship Week, obviously a couple of the games that went on there. More so just skimming over those games and getting some reactions about that situation. But we're going to focus more on a little bit of off-the-field situations that are brewing right now around college football. As you could tell by the title of this episode, it's a bit of a portal preview. We're going to have a full in-depth episode next week when we're going to have Tyler on the show, go in-depth about, obviously more names are going to get added to the portal. More names might be finding a destination in the portal that we're going to skim on here today. So we're going to have a full portal show. We're going to do that next week. And then obviously we're going to do another portal show, but also transition into bowl week. Bowls, we're only, by the time that this episode will come out, we're only about a week away from the start of bowl season. So, we're going to do our bowl preview. We will be predicting all of the bowl games this year. We're going to go somewhat in-depth on some and pretty in-depth on others. Obviously, we have our thoughts right now about things that are going to play out. But first, I'm going to go over a couple of the games that happened this past weekend, discuss some of the big ones that happened around college football. Obviously, the biggest one, we're already about a week removed from this game. The first one I'm going to talk about, Washington, Oregon. Big one. Washington gets the job done, and I think a big thing about Washington that's been tossed around that I think we all kind of agree with is that, you just kind of got to respect Washington in this situation because we all picked against Washington. We've all picked for Oregon, and Washington just countless times this year has been able to prove themselves worthy, and that's a situation that Washington's kind of they've had to dodge that a lot this year. They've had a lot of dodgy situations where a lot of people, it wasn't exactly discredited Washington, but they didn't think that, and even us to an extent here on the Orbit Football Podcast, we kind of thought that Washington was just kind of, a team that was kind of sitting there. We didn't think that they could compete for a national championship, but now they're sitting there, second-ranked team in the country in the college football playoffs after defeating Oregon, and they're thinking pretty good about themselves. Going undefeated, somehow running the table. That's more, I think, of the impressive feat from Washington this year is just running the table and being able to do what they ended up doing. But hats off to them. Hats off to Kalen DeBoer. He's built that team very, 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 very well this year and last year too. Obviously, when you got guys like Odunze on the outside, Polk, McClellan, Dylan Johnson, that's the guy I kind of wanted to talk about this game. Dylan Johnson just was basically playing on one leg in that Pac-12 championship game and rushed for about $150 in that game. So he just was shredding Oregon, and he was laying his body on the line. Those are the type of situations that you want to see from a college football player, and have a guy like that on your roster that's able to lay his body on the line. And then obviously Penix, the guy that'll be in New York. We also got our 4 Heisman finalists. I know, Blake, we're really, a lot of us, I think all 3 of us are pretty sold on who we think is going to win a Heisman, and that's Jaden Daniels. I know, Blake, we about last a week ago, last Friday night, we kind of had a conversation there about Daniels and winning his Heisman trophy, but he's obviously the front runner right now, but Penix, he'll be in New York. Bo Nix will be in New York, and Marvin Harrison Jr., funny enough, will be in New York. Didn't really expect that name to be, a face that's on the stage going to New York. I thought it was going to be the winning quarterback of the SEC champ game, but it's Marvin. So, those are our final 4. Obviously, we have the one that's going to be the front runner, and we'll kind of hint on that a little bit. And that's another thing that we'll talk about next week is our award show. We're going to go through an award show for the year, for the regular season. Going to have that. That's really going to kind of be that second show next week after the portal show, and then we're going to lead into a couple of our bowl picks for the weekend and really the first week of bowl season. So, there's obviously a lot for us to discuss. after recapping some of these week's games, where we just kind of want to keep everybody open. Going to be a more laid back setting, I will say, for this episode today, since it's really only me and Blake, and not much more needs to be said about the college football playoff. But another big game that happened the past weekend, Alabama, Georgia. Blake, I know you and I picked this game right. We picked Alabama to win. The Tide, they looked like the better team in this game against Georgia, especially in that second half. They just were Bama in the second half, once again, where they looked very, very good. They had an injury with Kool-Aid McKinstry, and things stepped up right where it needed to be on the next play. And Bama's not phased, and obviously we'll get to who the Final Four are and who we kind of, are leaning toward a certain way, and it might be the Tide, I might say, to spoil that a little bit. But, Alabama just looked like a very good team. Georgia also looked like a good team, but you could tell that, some of their guys weren't 100%. I think that was a big situation for Georgia, was not having Bowers 100%, not having McConkey 100%, not having those weapons that they need in those games to be 100%, especially this year. But, their consolation prize, I guess, is what we're going to go to next. And the biggest controversy in college football that's come out this year is the Final Four in the college football playoff. It came down to it. We got the official rankings. Number 1, Michigan. Number 2 was Washington. Number 3 was Texas, and number 4 was Alabama, leaving undefeated Power 5 conference champion Florida State out. Really, the narrative that we got from the college football playoff was that it was mainly due to Jordan Travis being hurt, but there might have been, some undertones that were there over the past couple weeks. I know, Blake, you were just blatantly stating it last week that you thought that Florida was going to be really, put to the side in this situation, and they were. They were in this situation, but, we all, the three of us, kind of sat there. It was Saturday night. It was after all the games, and we had about an hour-long discussion, about an hour-and-a-half-long discussion, obviously off cam and off the record of when we talked about this, but, we talked about the correct thing, and we talked about the right thing to do. The right thing to do was to put Florida State in and put Texas in. That was the right thing to do in the situation. That's not what we got. The correct thing to do was to put Alabama in the situation, and Alabama ended up getting it. But it's a very, very, very interesting situation. Florida State doesn't get to play for a national championship. When they went P5, personally, my thoughts on it, I thought Alabama should have been the 4th. I don't think for the Travis reasons. I don't think for the money reasons. I think that Alabama was a better team than Florida State, period. And, we finally got the narrative from the playoff committee that, over the last 3-4 weeks that said, it's the 4 best teams. It's not, the 4 deserving teams or whatever they've been trying to say. But when you look at what they've done in the past, it's never really been the 4 best teams. You could argue that maybe I looked at it. I did my own thinking about it. I think only 2 years we got truly the 4 best teams in the college football playoff. And funny enough, those were the years I believe that Alabama did win the SEC championship and made it in as an at-large bid. So take with that what you will. But it to me, it's never been the 4 best teams. And obviously, it's last year, the 4-team playoff. We're going to go to the 12-team playoff. We have our thoughts personally on the 12-team playoff, and to really kind of sum it up here about us on the 12-team playoff. I know I'm not going to speak for you, Blake. I'll let you obviously have your points here, but I think we all kind of agree that it might not be the thing that a lot of people think it's going to be for college football, because if you look at what a 12-team playoff would have been this year, your Final Four, realistically in our eyes, is going to be either Ohio State, who didn't make the playoff, ended up finishing 7th, Georgia, Alabama or Texas, or Michigan or Oregon. Those would have been your Final Four, and you're sitting there and you're not giving Washington a chance because they have to go play a team that's very well built. I think what it would have been, I believe, Ohio State. So, and I think we all three would have picked Ohio State in that game. I think we all three thought Ohio State would have been a better team than Washington. So, it's starting to formulate something where we might be seeing a cycle. And it's an unfortunate thing, obviously, but, at the end of the day, it might be the right thing, because at the end of the day, you want to get the 4 best teams. You do. It's just that it's not going to create the parity you want it to create, because you're going to have the same teams who recruit the best, who have the best funds, who have the best coaching, who have the best, behind the scenes, the best facilities, everything. Those, four programs are always going to be your four teams. You might have somebody sneak in and out every once in a while, but as long as Kirby's at Georgia, as long as Saban stays at Bama, as long as that program stays what it is, you're going to see those teams competing against each other, in these situations. And it comes down back to the argument this year where, to me, there really wasn't a right answer, in my opinion. I think that it was a situation where somebody was going to get mad out of it. And, if you went deserving, obviously you would go with that. But even then, I don't think they got the four best teams right, because if you argue with the four best, I think we both agree, and Tyler would agree with us, Georgia deserved to be in there, and Ohio State deserved to be in there. So, it's who knows at this point. I mean, a lot of people said the games don't matter. I think that's wrong. A lot of people think it's for money purposes. I don't think the decision was made for money purposes. I don't. I think that the decision was made because they thought that Alabama was a better football team than Florida State. Now, if they would have just stuck with that and not tried to, go around it, did the committee, and say, oh, it's because of the Travis injury. If they would have just said straight up, we think Alabama's a better team than Florida State, I would have took it and I would have been fine with it. I would have been perfectly fine with it, because I would have seen that and I would have said, you know what? This team won the SEC. The SEC is the best conference in all of football. No matter what you want to say, if you want to call it bias, if you want to call it something else, SEC is the best conference in football, period. It is. You can't argue with that. Now, you could have maybe made the argument that the Pac-12 might have been very competitive here when you look at it top to bottom, but when you look at the elite class of the SEC, really, the elite class of it, it's the best conference. They recruit the best, they have the best funds, they have the best facilities, they have the best coaches, they have the best players, they put out the best talent. I mean, and I don't think that I could see a world that I live in where the SEC champ is left out of a 4-team playoff. Even if they had 2 losses, I don't think I could have seen a world where that would have been, non-existent, because what you're going to do is what they basically said was we value either they value Alabama straight over Florida State, which is what I think they should have said. But you could have also made the argument, in my opinion, Alabama won the SEC. SEC is the toughest conference of football. If you're the conference champion of the toughest conference of football, you deserve to get in. Florida State, you play in the weakest weakest Power 5 conference. You deserve to be out. They could have made that argument. But I think that's really the biggest issue of it. Blake, I'll turn it over to you. Just, what either thoughts or what preview anything about the college football playoff for this past weekend that you want to talk about.
Yeah, so you hit on a lot of it here pretty well. I, I got some strong thoughts here, so I'll just jump in quickly off the top. Obviously, no problem with number one. Michigan manhandles Iowa. They've been great all season, undefeated. They've looked like the best undefeated team in the country. They're the most deserving for that number one spot. They've run through competition nonstop. They play Ohio State and they beat Ohio State, who at the time was number 2 in the country. They earned that number one spot, no problem there. Washington beats Oregon there in the rematch in the Pac-12 title game. Like you said, we all kind of saw it going the other way, but I mean, hats off to them. They that's the best game I've seen Washington play all year by far. They stepped up when it mattered. It felt almost as if they found another year. Honestly, they blew Oregon off the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football, which is maybe the least expecting thing there, or the least thing I expect out of that game. I did not think that was going to happen whatsoever, but especially offensively. I mean, they shoved Oregon's defensive line downfield. Never saw that come in a million years. So good for them. They are in that number 2 spot pretty well. I think they even had an argument for number 1 there between them and Michigan. I don't think it would have been egregious either way to put either one of them at that number 1 spot. I think they both had fair arguments and would have been understandable if either one was sitting at number 1 there. And then we get to the next 3 here, which is where all of the problems come into play with Texas, Alabama, obviously getting in, and then Florida State gets left out. Um, I am firmly against Florida State being having been left out of this. I see no. I understand that the four best argument is there, but if we're doing the four best teams, I don't know why we're not playing Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia and pick your fourth, Texas or Oregon. I would say I don't care that Oregon lost again. I think they still I would favor them over most of these teams in this thing. I would favor them over Washington if they played again, even though they did just get beat on a neutral field. So I don't know why if we're gonna go with this four-team argument. I don't know why we're just not going to throw Ohio State and in there over at Michigan. Why we're not going to throw Alabama and Georgia in there both as well. So the four best team argument that the committee gave out there just holds no water to me. I think it's a terrible argument. We've never gone off the four best teams. It shouldn't be based off the four best teams. You don't pick a champion based on the best teams. You pick a champion off of who deserves it and who earned it. Um, and Florida State earned a right to play for a national title this year, and they're not going to get that, even if they would have been, more than likely kind of just dead in the water there, waiting for someone to come chomp them up. Yeah, they looked bad. I get it. They looked terrible in the ACC title game. That was a horrible football game to watch. Two inept offenses, just brutal. That defense though for Florida State was incredible. Louisville's got a good offensive line. Florida State blew through it for half that game. Braden Fisk lived in the backfield. They've been a good unit all year long. So I think they kind of go undersung there, or the unsung heroes of that team. But they go 13-0 in what all of college football designates as a Power Five conference. They blow the brakes off of LSU in week one. LSU still a borderline top 10 team, ranked number 13 in the playoff rankings. They were number 5 when that game happened. If you look at power rating metrics from anybody who has those, LSU's in the top 10 of those. They would be favored against most teams in the country right now. And Florida State, just absolutely ran through them. I mean, it was a blowout for the entire second half. I would know. I watched that one in somewhat disbelief, having to see how that happened. I mean, they shut LSU out in the second half, minus one broken play touchdown where the cornerback fell down on the play. So if that one broken play doesn't happen, LSU doesn't score a point in the second half there of that opener. They beat Clemson. They survived Clemson in a close game. It was still early in the season, sure, and Clemson hadn't quite figured it out and aren't what they are right now. But you take that game to overtime, you win that game. I mean, every single test they've gotten, they've pushed through and they've survived it. And the big thing becomes the Jordan Travis injury. Well, okay, yeah, Jordan Travis goes down, brutal injury, gruesome injury. And what does Florida State do? They respond by winning that game. They go on a 58-0 run to end that one. I get it. It's a FCS school that you should blow out, but still, they do it. They handle their business there. They go into the next two games and they win those. They handle business the whole way through. So that they earned the spot. I cannot see a way in which they'll. I think they should have been the 3 seed. I understand the injuries of thing, but we don't go. You should never pick a team or pick a champion. Sorry, or pick who plays for a champion, since that's what this is. This is who we are making. The subjective opinions of however many people are on the committee, 12 people or whatever it is. Decide who has or who has earned the right to play for a championship. Um, and we're not doing that there. We're just we didn't do that in this situation. Um, I think there's no reason they shouldn't have been the 3 seed. Like I said, you handle business all year long in what we designate as a Power Five conference. Sure they're the weakest link. You would say certainly of the Power Five. They've had a bad year even for ACC standards, and they've been down for the last 8 to 10 years. Even then, though, I mean, it's still what we still call it a Power Five conference. All of college football does, and they went through and they won it. So and they won it in an undefeated manner. So I don't understand how you can leave them out at that point when they did everything they were supposed to. They handled all of it that they were supposed to, and everything that was asked of them. And we put 2 teams that have a loss on the board here. and over them. And I don't disagree. I think Alabama, even with Jordan Travis healthy, I think Bama and Texas are better football teams. I do, but I they didn't earn the spot. It should go. It's a deserving. It's supposed to be the deserving team, and it's just not what that is. I mean, Texas, loses on in a shootout of a Red River game. Incredible showdown. And they before that they'd gone into Tuscaloosa and they manhandled Alabama. And I know the argument that I don't even think people are making the argument that they should on this one about why Alabama should have gotten in here, because I think the proper argument would be that yeah, they have that one loss to Texas, and yeah, they kind of got blown out by Texas, but this Alabama team that lost to Texas isn't what they are now or what they were then. Alabama that lost to Texas was miles different. I mean, I think that this Alabama team right now, if they played the version of themselves that they were in, what was that, early September? I mean, I think they would be favored by close to two touchdowns. I think they would beat them by more than that. It's a massively different team, but what ultimately comes down to it is a national champion should be forced to handle all that kind of situation. Yeah, you're down at the start of the year, but you think you can develop and you get better. Well, okay, but you still slipped up when you hadn't hit your stride yet. Um, and you can say the same about Texas. Texas has slept walk through the back half of their schedule. One so a couple of games that they played real close. They played close against TCU. Houston, almost managed to lose a couple of those. Kansas State, they beat at the very end there in overtime. So, I mean, they all have flaws, but it just is astonishing to me that we've done this, and the way we have. It makes no sense to me. Um, I think like you said, Kate, you don't think it's for the money of it. I disagree. I think I'm rather confident actually, um, that that's what this decision came down to. Um, but the market there was always. I think that there was a decent chance that Florida State got left out, regardless of the Travis injury. Quite frankly, if things continued as they would or would have. You've seen all the clips resurface this week of ESPN types, Kirk Herbstreit and the others, the game day crew, the playoff show crew, mentioning before Travis went down about how maybe a 13-0 Florida State isn't safe from a SEC champion Bama or and if Texas is there, which should have been astronomical then, and it was, but no one really paid attention to it. Then Travis injury happens, so on and so forth. Of course, when Boo Corrigan said that last week at the playoff show that it was going to be the four best teams that were not in the business of most deserving, that was when I knew that Florida State wasn't making it in. That was clear at that point. But it's frustrating to see. We're going to crown a champion this year, more than likely, that should not have been in the playoff, because ultimately Texas should have gotten that fourth spot over Alabama. Because yes, they have that because they had that head-to-head win and they earned that win. They deserve that spot over Bama, and Florida State deserved it over both of them. So, my early read, like Kate, you mentioned it there, we all have kind of an idea of what's going to happen in this playoff here, or at least have gut feelings. At least my gut feelings that Alabama's going to scorched earth the entire field here, and probably win this thing fairly easily. And they didn't earn a spot in this. They didn't deserve a spot in this. They didn't earn it. It's pretty mind-boggling, I guess. I don't know. Um, it just this is a great year for the BCS to have been a thing. That's for sure. Um, as most of these would be. I've learned I don't think people understood how good the BCS was at doing all this. But and then you mentioned the 12-team format that we'll go to next year. I don't think that would have helped at whatever. That's for sure. You mentioned some of the matchups you would have gotten. The unofficial thing here would have been you would have had Ohio State, lost to Michigan to get themselves knocked out of the playoff. They would play a two-loss Penn State team who already got beat by Ohio State and Michigan, really got dominated by both of them. That's a first round matchup for the right to play Washington in the second round, who's gone undefeated the whole way through and won a conference championship. I mean, what are we doing here? We're going to give two teams that one team that really didn't earn a spot in there, and one team that also didn't because they lost their most important game, and we're giving another chance. I don't know why we're doing that. There's a difference between best and deserving. The best team doesn't win the championship every year in every sport, nor should they. I mean, best teams slip up sometimes. That's how it happens. That's how all sports happen. You look at the Dodgers. The Dodgers have been the best team in baseball for who knows how long, and they can't seem to break through. They've won one World Series in the last, in that 8-year block that they've been really the best team. So Braves this year, the Braves set scorched earth to the world in baseball, and couldn't manage to finish the deal. The best team doesn't win the championship every year, but we're gonna give them the chance to still do it in this when they didn't earn a spot. I can't agree with it. I don't agree with it, and it's an unfortunate way for us to send up a 4-team playoff for sure. So I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I know we kind of it's somewhat a little bit of a agree to disagree kind of situation that we have. Um, I know, and I know Tyler's thoughts are very similar to yours as well. It's, I mean, it's a situation where I agree with the argument that not every year you look at the best team doesn't always win the championship. You mentioned baseball, obviously, with that, but I mean, even stick with football. Look at the NFL. I mean, the best team in the NFL didn't win the championship last year. The best team was probably the Eagles in the NFL last year. They lost in the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. I mean, I that's because that's. I mean, I don't know, and there isn't really like you said, the BCS would have been fine. It would have been fine this year because you would have had the two undefeated teams. Even if you base off Florida State, and they would have been the ones left out. So then, that's really the reason. I mean, even date back to the reason why we went to a 14 playoff. It was Oklahoma State in 2011. And they were basically in a similar position that Florida State's in right now. Oklahoma State lost one game. Alabama lost one game. Alabama lost their game to LSU by 3 in overtime, the number one team in the country, at home. And Oklahoma State loses their one game to Iowa State on the road on a Friday night. And Oklahoma State wins their conference. Alabama does not. Alabama gets in 2011, and Alabama goes and wins the national championship. Were they the best? Yeah. Were they deserving? Maybe not. And that's what got us to the 14 playoff. And even in the first year in the 14 playoff, we had this argument, and it forced change in the sport because it forced the Big 12 to go to a conference championship game. Because if you likely go back to 2014 and you likely have a conference champ game between Baylor and TCU and play that game again, the winner of that is probably going to get in over the eventual champion Ohio State. And you can't argue with that. You can't. I mean, does it suck? Yeah, because the team that obviously won the national championship, it might have been the best team in the country, doesn't win at all. But like you said, Blake, you don't get that often in sports. At least sometimes from time to time. And would it have been interesting to see a year where the SEC streak finally comes to an end and they're not playing for a national championship? Yeah, that would have been interesting. I still would have watched. I still would have been interested. I and maybe it's because I don't really think that. I think a little different about how things are going to develop in the playoff than you. Obviously, the favorite is the favorite, and I think the favorite right now is my favorite. I would say Alabama is my favorite to win the national championship. But anything can happen. That's why you play the games on the field. That's why we got that's why we got 3 of the 4 teams that we did. And I just, the situation with Florida State, like, I personally, when it happened, I was fine with it, and now that I've got more time to kind of sit on it, I'm not okay with it. I go back and forth on it really, really hour by hour because I don't know. To me personally, I think the committee also put themselves in a very difficult situation because they did their rankings in a purpose because I don't know if you also knew this. for anybody listening, this is the first time that we've had a team outside of the top 6 jump into the top 4. And we didn't have one. No, we had two. We had two in the first time ever. The week before the rankings come out, we had 2 teams outside the top 6 jump in. And we hadn't had that ever before, period. And we had 2 in the same weekend. And I understand that the one of the 2 beat the number 1 team in the country, and they're Alabama, but I mean, it completely wipes away precedent, and it basically, to me, it's a sad truth that's prepping us for the future. And like I said, it's a sad truth, but it's the truth, and the truth isn't exactly the best thing for the future. You know, we'll have to see how the 12-team playoff shapes out. Obviously, the 3 of us all have our opinion, and we're kind of agreeing that we think it's, you know, we're going to see a national champion that might not be deserving, and it's going to be maybe even worse than the discussions we had in college football 7 years ago when it was just Clemson and Bama every other year. I think we might be in a situation where it might be worse coming up, and it's an unfortunate thing. Are we going to see more close games? Are we going to see more exciting games when, you know, that matter, quote unquote? You know, yeah, but is the end result going to be better? I don't think so. You know, because you don't have that parity in college football. Most times you don't have that parity in college football. And the one year that you kind of do have that parity, you know, at least since we've gone to this playoff era, is the one year you could leave out the SEC and you don't. And it's an unfortunate end, because personally, what I thought was going to happen, because I, you know, obviously you and I, Blake, we predict this doomsday scenario. We predicted it with the games we picked. Obviously, I didn't directly, because I thought Florida State was going to lose at some point, and I think the committee thought at one point Florida State was going to lose, and they didn't, and it screwed them. It screwed them in making a decision. So they basically had it predetermined in their mind. Well, Florida State's going to lose the game, so we're going to leave them out. Didn't happen. So then they have to go and justify their reasoning. I don't know. It's who knows? Who knows? There's not a right answer in this situation, in my opinion. And obviously, Blake, you stated your opinion, and I think both are right. I really do. I think both are right in this situation. Like I said, agree to disagree type situation. But, you know, I think that's really enough to add on to the pile that is the college football playoff fire, and moving forward in college football. But we're going to move on a little bit in the show. Obviously, it also says portal preview in this show. But before we get to that, we got to talk about some more coaching changes. I know, Blake, you and I, about, you know, a week or so ago, kind of went in depth with some coaching changes. Talked about a lot of things around college football. There's obviously some new things that have developed. You know, a couple big ones. I'm going to really run down this list that we have right now, including things that happened today. But, you know, we're going to go through, you know, I'm going to ask you first, you know, what are some of your best hires, some of the worst hires that you've seen so far. But Fran Brown, Georgia's defensive back coach, is going to Syracuse. Trent Bray has been elevated at Oregon State. He will now be their head coach from defensive coordinator. Kurt Signetti from James Madison will be going to Indiana. Sean Lewis, our guy, from Colorado, the Mac guy that was before at Kent State, was Colorado's OC until Deion, for some reason, threw him out to the curb. He's going to San Diego State to take over for Brady Hoke. Willie Fritz traveling to Tulane to Houston. Spencer Danielson, I know we're really high on this one. He's been elevated to Boise State's head coach. Scott Walden from Austin Peay has been hired at UTEP. Bryant Vincent, New Mexico's offensive coordinator, has gone to Louisiana Monroe. Derek Mason is going to Middle Tennessee. Bronco Mendenhall going to New Mexico. Jay Sorvell is going to be elevated at Wyoming after a retirement there. Manny Diaz, these are really the 2 hires that came out today, but Manny Diaz, Penn State's defensive coordinator, obviously, you know, used to be Miami's head coach not too long ago, getting hired at Duke. And really that came out today. It just got a lot of smoke around it today. I know another defensive coordinator in the Big Ten's name was getting tossed around with that job, but it goes to Manny Diaz, and then Bob Chesney from Holy Cross ends up getting hired at James Madison. So like I said, Blake, you know, what are some of your better hires, and what are some of the, iffy hires that you see so far?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting ones in here. The first one, obviously, that stands out to me, I've been banging on the table for this for weeks now. Spencer Danielson they've taken the interim tag off of there, and he'll be the permanent head coach at Boise. He's a Boise guy. I've been pounding the table for this to happen. I'm a big fan of this move. I think he's been there for it's been like 6 7 years now. He was a Harson hire. Harson offered him a job at Auburn as the DC when he left to take that position, and Danielson turned it down to stay at Boise in that defensive coordinator role. Got passed over for the head coaching position at that point. They gave it to Avalos. That didn't work out. He gets the interim this year, and turns the season around. Really, that they completely changed trajectory. They looked like a team stuck in the mud, that just really was not hitting any of the potential that they had. Under Avalos, they make that move. Danielson takes over and leads them, to the not just to the title game, the Mountain West title game, but to win it as well. So really impressive job there. I like what he's got. He's a young guy, um, not a bad recruiter, but it's a tough job he's going to have in Boise. I think that job has kind of fallen from the top of the table in the past several years. In the new era of college football, the NIL there isn't spectacular. Good fan base though; they've got really good fan engagement. They always fill that stadium out. You get the prospect of playing on the legendary blue field, so they have recruiting tools there at his disposal to use. Just the NIL isn't there like you would hope it would be at times. But regardless, I think he'll do a really good job there. He's a Boise guy. He's been a really good DC there, um, and he gets that team playing up constantly all season long. So I like that move. I think going out of the on a national search, I think would have done a lot to hinder or hamper that program going forward. I think moving away from him would have really driven off a lot of people, and probably player wise and staff wise. And I think you would have been stuck searching for a lot of assistants and a lot of new players at a place that it's not going to be super easy to get those folk to. And Danielson will be able to keep a lot of those guys in place, and he's got the knowledge of how everything works there, and he'll be able to put his own spin on things going forward. So, really like that hire. Big on that one. And we'll do, I'm sure, down the line at some point after everything has been finalized with things, more official grades between all three of us, and everything. But just initial reaction, that one I really like. As well, Kurt Signetti going to IU. Obviously, they paid the 20-some million dollar buyout to to Tom Allen to get him out of there, um, which kind of surprised a lot of people. I wasn't overly shocked by it. The new influx of money coming in there, I think that job has potential to be better than it has been. It's a tough spot still. It's still one of the lower end jobs in the Big Ten, certainly. Uh, but Signetti's a good coach. He's been a good coach for a long time. He's done this for a long time. He has James Madison as one of the best FCS programs for a while. It took him to the FBS these last 2 years. Has been great there. We had the controversy around them this year. They would have played for a Sun Belt title last week had they not been ineligible due to the move up. I think that's a really good hire there. I think he's going to be able to put a structure in place at Indiana, and a culture in place that has won a lot. Um, so we'll see how that works out. But I like that hire off the rip as well. He's gonna have to use the portal pretty heavily there. I believe in his ability to, though. They portaled in some decent players there over the years. At least for what JMU is, they portaled in decent players there. Um, so I think that hire has a good shot to work out as well. Um, and one I'll hit one that I don't like as well, and then I'll hit one that I'm kind of just questionable on, and interested to see how it goes. I'll end on or I'll start here of the last two. I don't want to end negatively, so I'll start with I'll hit the negative one first here. Um, I not a huge fan of the move here at Wyoming, honestly. Saulville gets promoted to the head coaching position from DC. He's been a good DC for a long time there. Bounced around some lower end programs. No offense to the likes of Wake Forest and Wyoming, and even Minnesota, I think, was in there. But not the cream of the crop programs by any means. He's not really ever been the cream of the crop for a long period of time, which I guess Wyoming isn't that, and he's not going to be the head coach of a top level program in Wyoming, but a good Mountain West program. Um, but I think that job had a little more pull than probably the Wyoming folk expected it to have. You know, Bull's been great there. He'd come from NDSU from North Dakota State, um, and you know really had that program. Had a really good team this year as well. I thought they were going to have a shot at the Mountain West title until they took a couple of losses there. Um, but I just think that job had a little more pull. I think not doing a search was a bit short sighted. Maybe they did do them behind the scenes. I don't know for a fact. But I think, you know, the way they promoted pretty quickly there tells me that this was kind of a bang bang decision from whenever Bull told them that he was going to retire, that they kind of went with his guy. I don't know. I would have, my first thought when it happened was that they would go for Vigin from Brent Vigin from Montana State, who was a Bull guy for a long time. He was on his staffs at North Dakota State and actually at Wyoming as well for a couple of years before he ended up taking that head coaching job at Montana State. They've been a really good team under him. I thought they should have made a move there, or at least test the waters, and maybe they did, and maybe he said no. That's not out of the question. Certainly, I don't know for certain, but um, if they didn't try that, if they didn't go that route, I think it's a mistake. If they got turned down, obviously it is what it is. But I think there were better options there that you could have gone for, even if he did turn you down, than just promoting in house. It's just a questionable one there for me. I'm just not a big fan of that one. And then one that I'm interested to see how it goes. That I haven't, it came out today, so I haven't made a strong read on it either way. But I'm really interested to see what Manny Diaz does at Penn State, or at Penn State, sorry, at Duke. Obviously, coming from Penn State now, he was, of course, the head coach at Miami for a handful of years. Things didn't go great there. They had, I think, one decent season in there, but they never really got over much of a hump. They kind of just sat around that bowl eligibility line for most of his time there. And it ended up eventually, sparking the move to bring in, the Miami kid and Mario Cristobal. And they sent him packing in a really not not the most cordial way. That was not a real good ending to that relationship. But he landed on his feet, took the DC job at Penn State, was really good there for the last few years. They had one of the best defenses in the country, without a doubt, statistically and just, watching them play. They were just elite, really at every level. And they looked the part all the time. One of the best rushing defenses overall as well. So he's a real good defensive mind, great defensive coordinator. He's had that experience now as a head coach. Hopefully, he's learned some from it, and from what not to do and what to do in certain spots. So we'll see how that goes. He's got the experience under Franklin now as well, who's I think a very good coach and an underrated coach in this sport. So we'll see what he does there, but I don't have a strong read on that one either way yet. But I'm really intrigued to see kind of how he fills out that staff, and then what happens off the field and on the field going forward for that program.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I'll talk about a couple other ones that I want to talk about here, but I'm kind of the same way with Diaz. That I feel the same about, at least of the four that you talked about. Three of them I feel the same about, and obviously, those being the Danielson one. I thought that was a great elevation that they ended up doing there. I think it just kind of fits for Boise there, but with Manny is that what's kind of the future going to hold. I think that it's a big question right now. I think Signetti, the other one that you talked about that was positive, I think Signetti with Indiana is a really, really good hire for them. But Diaz, it's I think it's kind of a good proving ground spot, because he's going to have to build a program there at Duke, because they're being pretty stripped right now of all of their assets, with Elko obviously leaving to Texas A&M, and that them looking very promising around the midway point of the season, and then kind of falling apart down the stretch of the season, obviously with injury and such, but still wasn't exactly the best ending of the season for Duke. So I'm interested to see what Diaz can do there. A hire that I really liked, and I'll say a hire here in this situation, Fran Brown. Georgia's defensive back coach at Syracuse. For a while, the smoke around this job was Dan Mullen getting the Syracuse job. I know they were even joking about it on ESPN, but, even we, to an extent, thought it was going to be Dan Mullen. And then within 12 hours of the eventual hire, Fran Brown's name got tossed around, and I think that's a very good hire for them. Obviously, if you can get a guy that's on Georgia's staff, no matter what type of coach he is, it's perfect, for Syracuse. I think they're going to try to build a good thing there. Obviously, a team that went bowl eligible, but, Dino Babers, time is up for him, and rightfully so there. But I thought that was a really good hire. I thought Trent Bray at Oregon State, obviously losing Jonathan Smith, that guts you. Most of that, I don't even know if that team has an active quarterback on their roster right now for their bowl game. It's a tough situation right now for Oregon State, and at this point they're just trying to maintain stability, keep a roster intact. I think that elevating somebody within is a good situation to do that, especially when you're losing. The future still. I don't even know if they have a full schedule out for next year, because I know that. I don't even know if we talked about this yet, but Oregon State and Washington State have created I think they're still going to be in the Pac-2, Pac-12, whatever you want to call it. I think they're still going to be, at least together with Larry Scott out there. But, those two have signed a deal with the Mountain West to play 6 of their games against Mountain West teams. So they're basically kind of like Notre Dame's affiliation with the ACC with that. And I know that obviously Washington State, and I saw the news today, Oregon State, both of them will be maintaining their rivalries with the teams that will be departing to the Big Ten. So the Civil War stays alive with Oregon State and Oregon, and the Apple Cup stays alive with Washington State and Washington. I know that was a little bit older news, but still, it's a really uncertain situation for Oregon State, and to try to maintain stability, I think, is the best way to go in that route. And then really the last of the really good hires that I liked was Sean Lewis. I know, the three of us kind of have been pretty high on Sean Lewis, because we kind of got to see him up close in person last year, and the past couple of years with him being at Kent State as their head coach. I know, obviously, when they played OU, Ohio last year, that game was a pretty crazy offensive game, and a pretty crazy game in total. And I stuck with Lewis, and then I heard the idea that he's going to Colorado to be their OC. I thought it was a really good hire there from Deion, and Deion for some reason just kind of took the duties of him away, and I thought he was doing a disservice to Lewis, and I don't blame him wanting to leave Colorado, especially after what the tail end of that season was. But I think him leaving and then basically getting an elevated position from Kent State, staying in the Power 5 to San Diego State, taking over Brady Hoke, I think that's a pretty good position for him to be. San Diego State's been a job in the Mountain West. It's been a pretty solid job, over since really Brady Hoke took it over. They've been a pretty solid program. Have produced some NFL talent. Have had some years where they're scraping the college football playoff rankings. They've been some of the better programs in the Power 5 or the Group of 5, and I think that Lewis can do a good job of trying to get them back to that. But the last one I kind of want to talk about that's making me scratch my head a little bit is Willie Fritz. I know Tyler was kind of big on this one, but Willie Fritz is an interesting hire here for Houston, because we kind of talked about this, Blake, you and I did, of after Holgorsen got fired, we think that Houston can really be one of the best jobs in the new Big 12 moving forward with the amount of resources that are available there. And it was interesting that Fritz left Tulane, because it seemed like he had everything at his fingertips there at Tulane to be successful. And obviously he was probably going to have more resources at Houston, but it's a really weird hire to me. It's a weird leave. It's a weird hire. Everything all together there with Fritz, I think is a bit interesting. I think Tyler might go more in depth with that one too whenever we get him back on the show, because I know he had some strong feelings about that one. But that really wraps up our coaches talk. So now we're gonna go a little quick hitter. We are picking a game this week because, folks, it is Army-Navy week. We got one more regular season left. Both of these teams not bowl eligible, but Army and Navy squaring off. Both teams 5-6 this year. I believe they're playing that game up in Foxborough this year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
they
Gillette
moved it.
Stadium.
It's been at the Link for at least a while. It's been in Philadelphia, but they're moving it to Foxborough. I think we just got news that Bill Belichick was going to be game day's guest picker. But yeah, this game is on CBS. We're going to keep it kind of short here. I just want to really quick fire here, Blake. Army, Navy, and who to cover.
Yeah, always a great game. Love the puzzle circumstance around it all. It's an important game. You get to see, you get to show off some of the future folk that are going to fight for the country. So great to see always every year. There's a reason it's such a big tradition. It's an incredible thing. Hopefully, get to go to that one day. Not this year, obviously though. So, but really excited to see it. Personally, I'm gonna go here with a couple of my friends from college. I got two or three friends that are all Army, so I'm gonna go Army beat Navy here. I honestly don't recall what the line is. I know it's a 3 point. I just don't remember which way. So
Army.
I'll so I will go Army to cover that. Actually, then I will go Army to cover and Army to win this one.
So you're going to go Army to win the Army-Navy game. Tyler, he's going to go, obviously not on, but he told us his pick. He's going to go with Navy for the same reason why you're going Army. He's got more of the Navy side in his family, so he's obviously taking Navy to win and Navy to cover. Me, I'm split actually on this one. I got both sides of my family kind of involved with both. A lot of the armed forces altogether, some of the Marines as well, or past Marines. So it's a little bit split. I gotta kind of apologize to my grandpa who I've been close with the Navy. He was in the Navy back in the day, but I'm gonna roll with Army in this one. I'm gonna pick Army to win and cover in this ball game. That's gonna be my pick of the week. We're not really gonna be flashing any graphics or anything like that this week, but this will be a game that we're somewhat picking. So keep an eye on that. But when now we got to go to really the what we're gonna transition to in our next episode, and that's the portal. Portal's been on fire over the past handful of days. Obviously, we kind of talked about a couple that were in the portal, beforehand, but it has opened up, and it's portal season. When you wake up on Tuesday morning, open up your phone, and you're, me. Obviously, I'm getting ready for classes for the day in college. I wake up, I look at my phone, I look at my social media, and I see that Kyle McCord enters the portal for Ohio State. Had me by surprise. I was the most shocked I was going to be. Obviously, I've voiced on the podcast my gripes, we'll say, with Kyle McCord. But I didn't expect him to leave Ohio State, and he's in the portal. Another big names, Dante Moore is in the portal. We kind of talked about and expected that one. Cam Ward's been a guy who's in the portal and got a lot of smoke around his name. Dylan Gabriel, a lot of Oklahoma folk thought that he was going to put his name in the portal. He's still got one more year. Brock Vandegrift, I know, Blake, you kind of want to talk about that one and go a little bit more, little highlights. Deion Burks for Purdue is a big, interesting name at a wide receiver. And then obviously the big guys from Texas A&M and Walter Nolan and LT Overton are really the big defensive lineman names, but there's a lot of guys in the portal right now, Blake. I want to turn it over to you here real quick. What's a little preview right now of what you've seen so far with this portal talk?
Yeah, like you said, obviously we're going to go more in depth with our next episode on this, which we'll pretty much fully dedicate to the portal. But some quick hitters here on this one. This is, by far, I think the best portal class we've seen hit so far in the couple of years that we've been doing this in this fashion. With the open portal and the NIL and everything. This is it's what 3 or 4 years now that we've been doing it this way, and this is by far, I think, like I said, the best one that we've seen. Just with I think you talk about 2 years ago with some of the top end talent. You saw Caleb Williams, you saw Jackson Dart, those kind of guys hit the portal. That was a really good top end class, but the depth on this one is what really hits it. There's 70, 80 guys in there right now that I think are going to play pretty big impacts, or I think could easily play pretty big impacts, depending on where they go next. And I don't think we're done seeing kids hit the portal. Obviously, we just even got today Trevor Etienne's in the portal from Florida. That's another big one that just hit a couple of hours ago. So we're by no means done seeing kids hit. But of the guys in there right now, like you mentioned, a couple of good guys that I really like. Obviously, Walter Nolan, Texas A&M, former number 2 overall recruit, number 1 overall recruit, depending on who you look at. Top 2 in pretty much everybody's rankings, though. 2 years ago now, and that was the 22 class, the legendary A&M class that shattered all the records. Um, Nolan's a great player. There's no two ways about it. A great interior defensive lineman can do pretty much anything you ask of him. Three tech, one tech, five tech. He can do anything. Um, he's going to blow up the middle in the run game. He was really good at it. I mean, A&M had a great front this year because of a big part because of him. When he was on the field, he went down in that Tennessee game. Came back actually right after the bye, I guess, but when he was on the field, they were a staunch defensive line, not just because of him, obviously, but he was a big part of it. And the other parts of their line that kept that thing going are also mostly hitting the portal as well. A&M hemorrhaging talent right now. He's not the only one. Obviously, you also mentioned LT Overton, who came out early of high school, so he was in that 22 class as well. He's a redshirt freshman, I guess, now going to be a redshirt sophomore next year, but still a younger guy because he reclassified to go a year early, so he's still age wise would be a true sophomore next season, even though he'll be a redshirt on the sheet. So, but he's got a lot of potential there. I really like what I've seen out of him. But I'm going to focus this. I'll talk about him a little more next time. But Walter Nolan, I'm going to keep going on here real quickly. A couple of big plays. I think SEC is obviously the place to watch. When I first saw the news come out, whatever night that was, probably 4 or 5 nights ago now, the first place I thought of was Alabama and Tennessee. Um, Alabama makes a lot of sense. They just pump out top end defensive line talent, have for a long time under Nick Saban. Yeah, it's a spot where I think they could use some help right now. I think that is as good as they've played. I think they're going to lose some talent on that defensive front, and I think a guy like Walter Nolan there would thrive. I think that they're playing above the level that you would expect them to with some of the interior defensive line. And you plug a guy like Walter Nolan in there, I mean, he'd be the best piece they've had there since probably Quinnen Williams. However, 7 years ago, 6 years ago, however long that's been now. Jonathan Allen, another guy you talk about like that. So I think he's got the potential to be on that level if he were to go there. Tennessee, he's from Tennessee. They finished, I think, second in his recruitment. Technically, if you want to call a second place finisher, um, he was right down to the wire with them and A&M. A&M came out on top there, obviously. But Tennessee, I think my lean is Tennessee. If I were to make a pick right now, I think that would be my first guess. But we'll see how things develop there. The rumor is Michigan's in on this as well, so we'll see about that. Maybe the Wolverines can swipe in and steal him. So some intrigue there on where he'll go. Brock Vandagriff, you mentioned there, the quarterback from Georgia, 5-star, formerly in the 21 class, I think it was, with Caleb and that crew. I believe it was that class. Good, talented QB. Kind of got buried on the depth chart at Georgia. Never ended up being the next guy. He was always felt like he was the next in line. Just never solidified that. I got passed up by Carson Beck this year to take that starting role. Um, and obviously Beck played great, so understandably why so. But I think Brock still got a lot of talent. He's got a good arm on him, got a big arm on him. I think he's going to be a solid addition to UK as he's committed there. It kind of came out pretty early after hitting the portal that was probably going to be the destination, and he committed there I think yesterday now. So I think it's a good pickup for UK. I think it's going to be a big upgrade in that QB room. I don't have any doubt about his ability to process the field at an SEC against an SEC defense at SEC speeds. That's what Leary's big downfall was this year, was that he was just not able to process the field quick enough, um, not able to get throws to his receivers quick enough. Just the speed for a quarterback, especially, is a big thing. If you cannot, play up to the level of SEC speed, then you're going to struggle pretty mightily. And I mean, that's what Leary struggled with this year. I don't expect Brock to have that issue. I think he's going to be a really good addition at Kentucky, especially if they get a couple of good pieces around him, which Raymond Cottrell, will talk about next time probably. Sounds like he might be one of those additions. So um, we'll see about that. But I like that addition a lot for Kentucky with Brock. I think that's a really big step for that program. And for that next year's team as well. And then the final one I want to talk about briefly is another guy that committed already. Toriano Pride, cornerback from Clemson, formerly. I think he was the top 40 overall recruit. I think he was number 40 overall in his class, actually. Really talented corner there. It was going to be kind of always either Oklahoma or Mizzou for him, I think. Um, he went on the 24/7 show and raved about Brent Venables. So I thought, I think there was kind of I wonder if maybe he was just going to reunite with them because obviously Venables recruited him to Clemson um, at the time. Of course, and shortly thereafter left. He never actually played for Brent Venables. I don't believe. I believe he'll be a true junior next year. So he never played for Venables at Clemson. So I thought maybe there would be a reuniting there of recruiter and recruit. But he instead goes back home from the St. Louis area. So he goes back home to Missouri to play for Eli Drinkwitz. Um, and co. That's a good football program there. It's a good team. They've developed some corners really well there. You look at Chris Abrams-Drain especially, really similar build there. Not the tallest guy, both 5'10", 5'11", but quick, really good, good coverage guys, especially in man there. You look at what they did with Chris Abrams-Drain, and I think that's probably what Pride's looking at here, and you're going to say, well, if he can develop to a guy that, in my opinion, was the best corner in the SEC this year, or at minimum, I think probably top three. If they can develop a guy like that, who was, I think, a 3-star coming out of high school, then what can they do with a guy like Pride, who was a high end 4-star, bordering on 5-star coming out, who's got great athleticism, great talent, untapped potential there, I think. So really interested to see what he does at Mizzou next year. I think it's a really, really good pickup though for Drink and Co. And that's a couple of guys there, and obviously, okay, I know you've got some guys here. I've got a lot more, but I'll toss it over to you here.
Yeah, we were gonna have initially Tyler was gonna join us today with it's a little bit of preview, and we're gonna go in depth with a couple more of these guys. But I'm gonna hit on a couple of mine and a couple that Tyler had. Obviously, the big one right now is Dante Moore. I think that I believe he's maybe fifth, top five, really consensus in a lot of portal situations. Either the 1 or 2 or 3 quarterback in this portal, no matter how you look at it each way. Dante, obviously first year at UCLA, was a very, very young kid, 18-year-old. Didn't really have a lot of weapons around him this year at UCLA. Struggled with turning the ball over. Obviously, they started off pretty hot in the year, and then he kind of got benched for Garbers, and then he came back. It was a lot of back and forth there for Dante. And I know consensusly we thought, he was going to be a shoo-in for the portal. Because we thought Chip Kelly was going to get fired. There was going to be a coaching change there. And then they retained Chip Kelly, and I kind of thought it was going to be, a last-ditch effort to keep Dante there. And obviously it doesn't work out. He's in the portal, but he's a Michigan kid. He was, born and raised in the Detroit area. He's a Michigan kid. Michigan's got a lot of talk around Dante recently. Michigan State was a big one, but, obviously with another name that's been tossed around with Aiden Childs, he's been a guy that's obviously he was at Oregon State. He was there with Jonathan Smith. He was ranked number one, I believe, by 24/7 as the number one player, number two player, number one quarterback in the portal. I believe 24/7 has Nolan as their number one, and then Childs is their number two, and he's the number one quarterback. But he's a guy that's very much rumored to go to Michigan State, follow Smith. He was highly recruited, so that's a big name. But, I think it kind of impacts Dante because Dante is just similar. He's a very highly touted recruit, very sought-after kid. Michigan's kind of been that's got the name thrown around, but it's been a little, lackluster as of recent. So, there might be a player hiding in the weeds. I know I read today that Ohio State was starting to pursue him a little bit more. But speaking of Ohio State, their really main pursuit right now is Cam Ward, another Pac-12 quarterback that has a lot of eyes around him. Ward really wasn't a highly touted recruit, but his on-field play has been very, very high level at Washington State for the Cougars. Really to start off the season, really for the majority of the season, he was that offense. He was making plays. He was doing great things in that offense. A great arm, a great passer, but also has the ability to move in the pocket and run and take off when he needs to. That's what a lot of people around Ohio State are kind of wanting, back to that mobile-style quarterback, similar to Justin Fields a couple of years ago with them. He's got a lot of talk around Ohio State. He's got a lot of talk around Miami as well. Auburn's been a name that's been tossed around a lot for him. So I'm interested to see where Ward goes. And keeping kind of with the Ohio State string here, like I said, I kind of opened up this segment with I woke up and saw on my phone that Kyle McCord had entered the portal at 6 a.m, and sorry for all the hurt, Kyle, but I think it's for the best. He enters the portal. Obviously, will be a true senior next year from Ohio State. Let him do 11-1 record this year. A lot of rumors around that was that he kind of it might have taken the easy way out of Ohio State, no matter how you want to look at it overall, though he is in the portal. A lot of talk is around Miami with him, and, I don't really know if Ohio State quarterbacks and going to Miami might be a trend that could continue with him when you look back to Tate Martell in the portal a couple years ago. But Nebraska's been a big school that's been on his radar. A couple other Big Ten schools, obviously a New Jersey kid, so Rutgers and Maryland were kind of two schools I saw that were kind of getting on him quite quickly. But Nebraska's really been the big one, and a Nebraska team with Matt Rule that's trying to build a program back up. Getting somebody like McCord wouldn't be bad for them. Obviously not an elite quarterback, but a quarterback that can sit there, can give you 1 to maybe 2 years of eligibility and bring some stability, I would say. You're going to have to surround him with weapons. I've made that very quite clear. But we'll see how it plays out with him moving forward. Another big 1 year of eligibility, really almost as a grad transfer. Dylan Gabriel, the left-handed slinger for Oklahoma. A lot of Oklahoma people thought he was going to be entering the portal. And he is going to be entering the portal. A lot of talk is around Oregon right now with him. And obviously it's just would kind of be almost a stopgap there for Oregon. Would he be a stopgap there? Would Dylan Gabriel be for Oregon? Really just 1 year left of eligibility. But, we've seen some older guys really succeed in Oregon's system. Looking at Bo Nix right now. But, I think Gabriel kind of fits that style of play. Fits that Oregon style of play. I know Lanning's a little bit different than maybe some past Oregon coaching, but it's still Oregon at the end of the day, and I think that he's got a lot of talk around there. And then the last two, a little bit farther down on the list, but some names that kind of weren't on. One of them was with a decent program. The other one was with probably the worst or second to worst team in the Big Ten this year. And the first is DeQuan Finn from Toledo. He's a guy that's been very mobile. I know, all three of us have got to see him up close and personal the past 2 years, with us being me, obviously, at Ohio, Tyler kind of following MAC football with Ohio, and then you, obviously, Blake, at Miami, which congrats to your Redhawks, by the way, for winning the MAC championship this year. Hats off to them. They beat Finn's Toledo Rockets this year, and Finn won it last year and beat my squad with the Bobcats. But, Finn... He was the first team All-MAC this year. I believe he might have been the MAC Offensive Player of the Year, if I'm not mistaken. He's been a guy that's kind of been lighting the world on fire up there at Toledo. When you look at Group of 5 recruits, I think a lot of maybe not the highest P5 schools, but kind of a low-end P5 could pick him up. Maybe a Big Ten school that's looking for a quarterback. Maybe in Indiana with Signetti coming in could be a good destination for him. I think that he has the talent. Obviously, he just kind of needs to be put in a better system with a bigger system, obviously. But he's got the talent with his legs. He's a very mobile quarterback overall. And the other one, the last one that I want to talk about, speaking of Indiana, Deion Burks with Purdue. He's right now, I believe, listed as the top wide receiver in the portal as it currently stands. Him and really Julian Fleming from Ohio State, and Fleming, highly touted recruit of his own. I believe he was the number one wide receiver in the 2020 class. So, ahead of guys like JSN, who's in the NFL, but still. When you look at Burks, he's a guy. He's kind of like that Purdue kind of slot receiver guy. He's going to be a weapon for somebody to have. It would be a good get for somebody to go and pick up Burks. I know he's got a lot of talk around him with some big programs, so it'll be interesting to shake out. But that's really just kind of we're just touching the surface right now. We're going to go fully in depth next week. Early next week, that is, and we're going to go fully in-depth with the portal. We're going to go in some more players, some more predictions, more in-depth about certain players, where we think they're going to go. All of that will be for you here on the Orbit Football Podcast. Early next week, myself, Tyler, and Blake will break that down. Big portal show that we're excited to really get into. And then, obviously, like we said, later on in the week, we're going to have our awards show, kind of talk about the regular season, what we saw, what we thought, our closing thoughts on the regular season. And then we're going to have our, obviously, switch right around and go into bowl week predictions. I mean, we're, like I said, just a little under a week or over a week away from bowl season starting. So we're going to be predicting all the games. I don't know how in-depth we're going to go with all the games, but we're going to be predicting all the bowl games. A little fun that we like to have around here about the Orbit Football Podcast. I know Tyler this year wants the best bowl record. I know last year, out of me and him, he ended up getting the better bowl record, but he's kicking himself with a couple picks that he ended up having last year. But yeah, we recapped the playoff. And it's kind of closing the book on the regular season. Obviously, the next time that you'll hear from us, we'll also have a Heisman Trophy winner, and I'm sure Blake will be popping the champagne with that with Jaden Daniels. But yeah, we went over the coaching changes, gave our a little bit of thoughts on the playoff. Had to go in depth about that. Little pick 'em Army Navy, just a very variety episode, and that's what you're going to get from the Orbit Football Podcast moving forward. But make sure to stay tuned with us. Obviously, it was a bit of a slower week. It was tough for us to record, but we finally got a show in. Went pretty more in depth than I thought we were going to today, but we did what we needed to do, and we'll be moving forward. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts. We post pretty regularly on our Instagram as well as our Twitter. This week will be a little quiet on the Instagram, but our Twitter will obviously have the release of when we release this episode, and obviously make sure to follow and subscribe to the Orbit Football Podcast on both Spotify and YouTube. It's where you can listen to this podcast quite regularly. But for Blake, this is Cade, and you have been listening to the Orbit Football Podcast.